What's up YouTube, and welcome back to another Procreate tutorial where today I'm going to show you step by step how you can create this design. You can follow along with the exact same canvas size and the same palette, as well as the included brush set as well. The brush set is simply just a few variations on the built-in ones. It's not something that's a solid standalone set, but I wanted to make sure that you had all of the exact same brushes that I used when I created this design. Now, all requirements are completely free. You can grab all of them from my Patreon in the link in the description down below. And there you'll find multiple ways of you getting hold of the requirements as well. So make sure to check out the help section there for different options if you're having some trouble. Now we're going for I don't want to say it, but a watercolor-ish style design. I don't want to say it's a watercolor as such, but it does have a lot of tendencies of watercolor in here. So make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them. And if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and join me over on Patreon. I post 3 exclusives every single month to my Patreon supporters. That's 3 exclusive tutorials every single month. And I've been doing that for years now, and the catalog sits at well over 120 exclusive tutorials over on my Patreon. You can see every single tutorial design on my website before you join me on Patreon. That way you can triple check that the content is for you. So make sure to check that out using the link in the description down below. Enjoy today's tutorial and let's get started. So once you've created your canvas, the first thing we want to do is go up to our actions, add a drawing guide. So you need to go to canvas, drawing guide, and edit that drawing guide. And we typically set it to 1/4 of your canvas size, which if you're following the same dimensions as me is 500. And then we'll hit done. And then that just gives us a layout so that you can see where I'm laying things out against the 4x4 grid so that you can position them correctly and scale them correctly. Now, of course, you can do whatever you wish. So if you want to make things bigger or smaller, you're more than welcome to. So let's also then go ahead and go to our layers. We're going to go to our background color. We're going to go to our palette and we are going to grab the color here, bottom of the second column from the right. Hit done. We're then going to go ahead and on this empty layer, tap on it. We're going to rename it first of all, because we're going to grab our keyboard and we're going to call it frame. So we're going to call it frame. And then we're going to tap on it. We're going to add a drawing assist to it. So it's going to utilize the grid system. Now, if you've never done that before, it's pretty straightforward to use. You can only draw now in vertical or horizontal fashion. So if we go to our colors, we're going to go ahead and grab the color in the bottom right. It's almost white, slightly off. We're then going to go ahead and go to our brush. Now we're going to use the Wet Landscape 2 collection that I've got here. They're basically brushes that are already in there with a few tweaks that I've added potentially. So you'll have exactly the same brush set. If you haven't installed these yet or you don't know how to install them, I'll leave a link to a helpful video in the description down below. Now we're going to use the soft brush. We want it to around about, say, about 6%, 6 to 7%. What I want you to do is press really firm and then just draw down. And then once you've drawn down, again, just right following that horizontal line of the edge of the canvas really firm so that way everything's nice and even. This is going to be our frame. It's going to keep things nice and organized later on. Now we're going to go ahead and go to our layers. We're going to create a new layer, drag it underneath your frame. So hold down on the layer, drag it underneath. We're going to go to our colors and grab the color in the top left of the palette. And we're going to go to our brush. We are going to go ahead and use the Eagle Hawk Wet. We're going to set our brush size to the size of 6% just to start with, because we need to draw in a horizontal line. That is going to run pretty much from here across. Now we can pop one finger on the screen to make sure it's nice and straight, and we want that to run off to around about here. It will lose its solidness later on, but we kind of wanted it just in play just to get started with. Let's change the brush size then to 33%. Same color. All I want you to do is draw up a bit of a mound here in the middle and making its way down. So you can utilize the brush. You can notice also it's really light. It's not solid darkness. And if you layer it on top, of course, it gets really, really dark. So utilize that to your advantage. Let's set the brush size to about 18 so we can get a little bit smaller and a little bit more detailed. I'm just going to go ahead and run it all the way down towards the edge of the land. And then I'm just going to coat it in, hopefully in one continuous layer. That's no problem if I let go. It's totally fine. And I can run that all the way to the edge. This is going to be our land, of course, that we're going to have our main scene on. Leave some grays in there. Don't be afraid to leave it a little bit more light tone. Now, one thing we do, of course, want to make sure is we've got a little bit of space for our staircase. The staircase is going to be around about here. So we're just going to go ahead and just make sure that there's a little bit of something, a bit of in a diagonal fashion here, so we can wrap it round behind the tree. Now, you do want to make sure you've got some bumps and lumps though in here. So you've got some interesting landscapes. Totally up to you what you want to add, but just a few little bumps and lumps along those edges. Some of them will get lost later on anyway, but just add in a few bumps for now. So let's go ahead and add in the arch. Let's go ahead and create a new layer. Let's swipe from left to right on both of these and group them together. We need that for later on, and we'll just call this, subject, because this is our subject area. It's where we're going to be looking and focusing our attention. Now this new empty layer, we're going to go ahead and we will change our brush to the Eagle Hawk detail. So setting the brush size to 6%, we're going to go ahead and draw in the arch here. So we want to go ahead first of all and just draw in like the curved parts across the top. And you can draw 3 of these if you can, and just varying up the sort of the gap in between will look great, but some sort of familiarity between them will look awesome, and just making sure that they kind of fit our sort of styling. You can always grab your cursor, you can use freeform, you can maybe flatten them down, move them into position where you need them. I need mine a little bit higher up. And then I'm just going to go ahead and just very simply just draw in the columns here. Now I do want to make sure that there's a big gap in between. This is meant to have that little bit of loose painting and inking style to it. So we want it just to symbolize the area, not necessarily like massively detail it. So something like this, zoom out for scale and just triple check that you may have to sort of chunk up this one a little bit, maybe even just bring the brush size down and, you know, slightly detail these. You can draw in some points on the ends, raise them up on the corners, you know, raise them outwards with a smaller brush size. You can just get in there and just detail it a little bit more, raising up the corners, just so that you've got a little bit more detail when zoomed all the way out. Now we are going to add some extra color to this though. We're going to go ahead and grab the red here, top of the third column from the right. We will set that brush size probably back to the 6% range, and we're going to very easily just draw in some red, predominantly on the kind of the right side of it. So this is taking a bit of an artistic liberty in a sense. It's not going to fit the kind of traditional kind of styling of this, but I'm just doing it because I want to add that color to it. With a 3%, I'm going to go ahead and run some red along the kind of top of the line here, leaving the dark line underneath. I'm going to do that for all 3 tiers of the design. So a little something like that. And then you should have some little accents of red popping through, but also the nice dark tones. Let's go ahead and draw in the tree next. So we're going to go to our layers. I'm going to create a separate layer for that. I'm going to go to my colors again and grab the top left of the palette. And we're going to set that brush size to the 6% range. Now you can utilize this really nice small size at this point to draw in your tree. And you kind of want it to kind of wrap over, and you want to create lots of kind of curves and spins and spirals and contorting to the tree. So I'm drawing in the tree trunk as we speak, and I'm going to kind of loop it up and around like this. So I've drawn in a bunch of lumps here, and then what you can do is you can kind of follow that on the opposite side, you know, creating these kind of small individual pieces that just fit into the general full aesthetic of the tree. So your tree trunk looks something like that. You can always go ahead and change it, you can redo it, and then when you're here, just keep creating all these kind of avenues and contorting lines for all of the roots in here. So draw in some lines in here that make their way down and onto the ground. You can spin them off. You can see there's a little bit of looseness in terms of also the styling and the actual sort of precision of it as well. I'm just going to draw in a few little lines here just to show it making its way down and onto the land. And then from that, with a really, really light pressure, if you struggle with pressure, just bring your opacity down. And with about 50% in here, keep letting go occasionally, but layering on some grey into the tree trunk. And you can just fill it in basically, like so. You can do it really quick and easy like that if you wish. But just layer on the colour though. Don't be afraid to go back over it a few times to darken it up in certain areas. But mainly you want to get that trunk to have a little bit of a detail to it. Then let's bring the opacity back up to 100%, keeping with the same brush size just for a minute. In fact, you could probably go ever so slightly smaller, about 4%. You want to just, again, think about creating all of the kind of the curves and the twists of the tree. So a little something like this maybe. And then off from there, we can go ahead and create another branch that just kind of runs out over here. Constantly keep looking at my grid. Look at where we are in terms of positioning, in terms of scale, in terms of layout. And then we're going to go ahead and do the same over here as well. Another lovely twist in here, and then a final kind of flick off over there. Now we actually don't need to heavily detail this tree. So what we're going to do is we're just going to set that back to the 6% range there, and just kind of just chunk out a little bit more here, just on these sort of main avenues for your branches. So a little something like this. We don't need to add anything towards the top too much because we're going to keep it simple and minimalistic. It's going to wrap some more color onto the tree there. We're then going to go ahead and add in the leaves to the tree. So we want to go to our layers and create a new layer. We're going to go to our colors and grab the top of the third column from the right. Same brush, we just want it set to 6% to start with. And we're going to create some lovely sort of canopies of all of the red, beautiful leaves in here. And look at what the technique is. It's just these kind of flicks like this, individual brush strokes, little flicks outwards like this, and then just keep going. And then occasionally you can do something like this where you get a little bit sort of small with it and very dense with it. So you get this kind of small trail off. And then we want to go around the whole tree first of all to add in the majority of the leaves to start with. And then we'll go back in shortly with a slightly smaller brush size so that we can detail it a little bit more and give it a little bit more interesting characteristics. Don't be afraid to go over the top of your tree trunk as well. Now here, of course, you're probably thinking, well, there's no branches. That's where we're just going to make it up. We're going to add in some coverage that we're just simply happy with and happy that it covers over certain areas. I'll then do another one here right in the middle. We don't need to add in all the tree trunks on this occasion. We're going to keep it minimalistic in that sense. And we want to create all these lovely little flicks like this. Lovely little flicks, sticking them all together. We're going to move up in towards this kind of area here. Do a very similar one. So another couple of flicks. This will be the highest one out of all of them. And then we'll keep going. Lots and lots of these little flicks in here. Again, we're gonna detail it again in a little moment. Just trying to get the basics of the general shapes in so you can see your whole tree. You can make out where you want to go ahead and make some adjustments potentially. Some more flicks in there, lovely. And then just on the end here, we'll go ahead and add in another one. Maybe making this one a little bit further out to the right, maybe a little bit more of a drag down. I want to cover over that branch a little bit more, so this one can have a bit of a droop to it. That's perfectly fine. So that's basically what we want to go for. And then you just want to start thinking about maybe making the brush size smaller at like a 3% and just creating very purposeful little flick outs like this. You can go even smaller at like a 2%. And I urge you to spend as long as you can on this, just creating little flicks off like this so that when you zoom out, it's got a little bit more detail to it. You've got a few extra little flicks in there. Don't be afraid to sort of really cover the whole thing with some interesting branch avenues. And feel free to also do something like this where you run like a random individual branch on its own a little bit further down, doing something a bit more rogue. The only thing I urge you to do if you do that, just kind of stick it sort of at an angle, but also try and bulk it back into the main sort of cluster of red a little bit. You don't want it to be sort of too low and free and a bit too disconnected. So you're juggling between like a 3%, a 1%. I think my sort of main advice to start with, if you're going to just go rogue with this for a minute, is just start with the 3%, get them all in, and then go back over it again, but with the smaller 1% brush size. So I'm just going to continue on now and just continue doing exactly what we were just doing all the way across this tree canopy up here. So I've gone around the whole of my tree now, added in some details. This is my finished kind of look to the tree. No doubt I might change it later on, but that's my finished look. See, I've added like a few low hanging ones as well. So at this point, feel free to pause. So you've got something to aim for with your tree as well. But take a look specifically for the amount of little flicks in here and the constant style of it, that it's consistent with the flicks. Okay, so we're going to move into detailing the land below. The first thing I want to do is go down to the land, tap on it and add a mask to it. If you've never used masks before, a white mask is showing and a black mask is hiding. So here we've got all of the masks set to white, so everything's been shown. However, if I set my color to black, I go to my brush and change it to the detail, just triple checking it's still there. By painting in now with black, I'm actually now going to start hiding part of the layer. So now what I can do is with a really random sort of 4 to 6% brush size, I can get in here with random little flicks and whatnot here to create kind of rocky kind of shapes down towards the shoreline. Nothing too crazy, just a little something like that. Look how easy and simple that needs to be to give you that impression. We'll then go ahead and do something over here. Now leave the middle of your arch because of course We want to create the steps, etc. there. So what we're doing is just roughing up the edge basically of the land here to give us some rocky areas of detail. Like so, just little random flicks. It would be enough to convince your brain of exactly that. Let's then go ahead and add in the steps for the actual land here. So we're going to go ahead and create a new layer. It needs to sit underneath your arch and in front of your land. We'll go to our colors and we'll grab the yellow at the bottom of the second column. Same brush still. And we're going to go ahead and just draw in some horizontal lines. Really simple, nothing too sort of particular. Now, the first one really you want to start with is the one through the middle. That gives you your kind of your go-to. Different pressures, different sort of weights to the pen will look amazing. Just keep it nice and different per one will look awesome. Let's then set the brush size a little bit smaller, about 3% as we start to make our way through it, and then backwards a bit more. And then just random lines, again, different pressures, different sizes as they make their way all the way up and round to the back. Now, one thing I urge you to do though is just make them a bit wider down here at the front. I want them to really have a wide grandness to them and then really fall off as they make their way much further back. Now we're going to break that down as well. We're going to go to our colors and grab the color in the top left of the palette. It's the same color as the base tone of the land. We're just going to simply get in there now and just run our pen with the smaller brush size again, still 3%. Just run through them, just kind of, you're almost adding like a shadow tone to the side of the profile of the step. You're also sort of breaking down that bit more sort of perfect brush stroke in your work. And then also set the brush size to say 6% and go just in between some of your rocks there potentially, and even just like around the base of there, just adding in some new important kind of minimal details in here. A couple of rocky kind of shapes here, little dashes and curves all the way up towards the back, just to give us some extra content to look at. We can always do that in here as well, but we've also got the grass to input. So we're just going to add in a little bit on top of some of the rocks, just to add in like a darker kind of border to them. And then maybe a couple over here too. So really quick and simple, nothing too overly precious almost. So let's go ahead and add in the grass that's going to sit here as well. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to go ahead and go in front of our tree. We'll create a new layer. We'll go to our brush and change it in the collection to the Eagle Hawk Wet. And then we're going to set our color to the green at the top of the second column. We want that brush size probably initially around about the 18 to 12 mark. I'm going to drop it to the 12. And this brush, if you do stroke after stroke after stroke in here, you'll notice that the green, every single time you do it, has a different color. That is because I've increased the hue saturation of the brush. So every time I tap, I'm introducing maybe a yellow tone, maybe a green tone, and everything in between. So a couple of little dashes across the land just to start with. Then bring that brush size down to 6%, and then make sure that on the end of your land here, you create some lovely little grassy flicks. You can even make the brush size like a 2% if you want to, and get really detailed with it. Get in front of your tree, add in some purposeful little flicks in there, keeping it simple, but there's a lot of this kind of flick motion in today's tutorial. And you can leave gaps, you can leave the ground grey colour to pop through if you want. It's totally up to you. You can bring that grey or green, should I say, all the way around towards like the base of your arch. You could even maybe add in a couple over here. I'm going to keep following the same flow though for the grass. I want them all to kind of look the same. So just a little grassy patch over there, but mainly over here, and just a few more down towards the edge of your land, so it goes right down towards the water's edge. Will look great, especially if you've got a gap in between your rocks. You definitely want to kind of allow that just to flow all the way down like so. And then what we'll do is we'll switch our color to the base tone here, top left of the palette, and introduce shadows in between them. So maybe you want to bring your opacity down to say 70% and just create some flicks in there to break down the green tones and introduce shadow variations of your grass. So if I zoom in for you, you can see every time I do one of these little flicks and strokes in here, we're just breaking down some of those green larger patches especially, and just introducing another version of the grass essentially, but just a little bit of a darker patch. And you can do something like Rogue and do something like this where you just create like a big dark patch in the kind of middle. You know, you don't have to keep it sort of too green and luscious and consistent. You can make it nice and random. You end up with something like this. Now we need to start adding in some water bleed of all of this. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new layer. We're going to drag it underneath our land, but it will fall out the group. So put it above the land, then just grab the land itself and move it above. Sometimes when you put a layer towards the bottom of a group, it can fall out quite easily. We'll go to our colors and we will grab the red top of the third column again. Brush wants to be the soft brush in the same collection. It's the soft airbrush with no changes. I've just grouped everything together for you. And about a 6 to 7% brush size. What we want to do is very, very lightly. This is what we're looking for. We're looking to add in the lightest little bit of bleed, not everywhere, but the lightest amount of bleed of the watercolor. This is not a watercolor tutorial, I must stress that, but it's got similar characteristics of a watercolor design. So don't be afraid now just to add in a light little patch of red. Occasionally, maybe you want to do something like that where you've got a good amount of bleed in there. It's totally up to you. Just don't have to do everywhere in the tree, but a little bit of that spread of the red will look great. Then we'll do it for the green as well. We'll grab the green top of the third column. And primarily we're looking kind of down here, aren't we? Really, really light with the pressure. Bring your opacity down if you're struggling, but just a really, really light bleed of the green up and out onto our background scene. Just a little something along there. And I'm not going to add any lower. I'll just add the tiniest little bit over here. We're talking really low opacities, okay? So try not to make it too much. But we're already starting to get that watery kind of look to it. Now we just need to go ahead and add in one detailed layer again. And we're going to go ahead and go to our layers and go above our sort of layers in this group and create a new layer. Go to your colors and grab the yellow at the bottom of the second column. Brush wants to go back to the detail brush, so Eagle Hawk detail. You can leave it at 6%, you can maybe even make it slightly smaller. We just need to get involved in our tree a little bit. In fact, I will make it just to the 4%. And we're going to go along some of the roots here on the right hand side primarily. So I say roots, it's more the sort of veins in the structure of our tree. I just want to add in some interesting highlight just to the top edges. I can keep the opacity really light in terms of my pressure and not add too much. I just want to add in some level of kind of highlight here to bring out a little bit more of some of these beautiful contorting lines in here. So just a little something like this, and when you zoom all the way out, you can see more of a curve and a twist to your tree trunk. Now we're going to go ahead and reflect this, so we're going to go ahead and collapse the group down. We're going to turn off our background color, we're going to turn off our frame, and then we've got just our work. We're going to swipe down with 3 fingers and go here to the option of copy all. We're then going to go back to our layers. We'll create a new layer and drag it underneath our subject. And then we'll swipe down with 3 fingers and go to paste. It will paste it on that empty layer. And then you can go ahead and go to the option here of flip vertical and drag it down and link it up on the ends. You can even grab freeform and maybe just take a bit of an artistic liberty and flatten it down just a little bit and tap on your cursor when you're done. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our layers. We'll turn on our background color. We'll turn on our frame. And then we're going to smudge this. So we're going to tap on it and add a drawing assist to it. So it's now utilizing the grid. Go to your smudge tool, tap on your smudge tool and use the wet sponge number 2 in the same group. The opacity is set to 60%. The size probably wants to be around about 5 or 6 to start with. I want you to drag it down and create a bit of a bleed down. I want it to look like the ink has bled right down our canvas, and we're just pushing that color down, introducing some greens in there too, and just don't be afraid to push something all the way down. Now, one thing I urge you to do though is start at the bottom now. So once you've done the edge of the land, come down here, push all these reds down. Don't be afraid to really smudge something out as well, but push these beautiful red tones all the way down. Also the tree trunk in here, giving it that lovely bleed and really kind of distort it. You know, start up here and push right the way through it. We want it looking like it has bled, but also we want it to look like a reflection, of course. I'm just running my pen, and because we've put the drawing assist on here, we can only smudge it now vertically, so we don't have to worry or stress about that in the slightest. Then go back to your land and say your arch, for example, and push over the top of the red. So you may end up pushing like a few of the dark tones down over the top of some of the red tones in there. Now, of course, you could use the motion blur, but it's not going to have this kind of long individual drags to it where we want to purposely show how much the ink is running down our canvas. Again, we're trying to take sort of nods towards traditional kind of sense of it, but as if you've grabbed your canvas, you've tilted it upwards towards you and bringing the top edge towards you, and then it's just bleeding down the page and it's all running down, and I want that kind of aesthetic to it. Now, don't get me wrong, in a second we are going to go ahead and add in a motion blur anyway, but this just gets us started in the right direction and shows exactly where we want it to all go. So once you've got this beautiful bit of color in your reflection, we can go to our adjustments, we can go to motion blur, we can drag down in a vertical fashion, and you want to add something subtle. Don't go mad with it, maybe 10%. You could go all the way up to say something around about 15. Either looks perfectly fine. I don't want it to look too motion blurry in a sense, so I do want to preserve a little bit of its structure. So I think I'm going to go down and probably to around about, let's say, 11%. And make sure you drag in a vertical fashion down your canvas. Then we're going to go ahead and go to our layer. We're going to tap on it and add a mask to it. Make sure you're on the mask, your color is set to black, your brush is changed to the soft brush, number 2 in the group. I'm just going to set the size to around about 20% and just fade out the bottom here. You should also now only be able to go horizontally, but just fade it out as it gets a little bit closer towards us. Now, all in all, this reflection's a little bit too strong. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the layer, tap on the layer itself and just bring its opacity down. And I'll bring it down to say around about the 70%, but that's temporary. You could always go back and change it later on. Let's go ahead and draw in the steps that are going to make our way towards the land. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to go in front of our subject and create a new layer. We're going to go to our colors and grab this black here, top of the first column. Your brush wants to be set to the eagle hawk detail. We'll set the size to the 6% range. Now, traditionally, a lot of landscapes, people will draw an S shape. It helps people go from the front of the scene, right in front of us, to the back of the scene. So with that in mind, we want to try our best to try and draw in a S shape here where we've got our stepping stones. You could do something drastic like this, or you could do something like this, very subtle curve to it. So by all means, experiment. You could have something that goes all the way around there. It's quite a long path to get there. So by all means, as I said, just create whatever you want. Now, they don't need to be as wide as the actual land there at all. And you don't need to press that firm either. So potentially you want to just bring your opacity down if you're going to keep going over yourself like I just did. And then just draw in a few. And then you'll also want to maybe draw in on a second layer an S shape that then you know what you want to follow. So for me, I want to go ahead and have a good little flick out here. That's what I'm going to go for. It's going to take a little bit longer than maybe doing something like this, but that's actually pretty fine. So I'm going to leave that and bring its opacity down to very, very light, and then go back to my layer with my stepping stones on, and I'll just start drawing them in. Now you can start with a few at the back. You could otherwise set your brush size to 18% and draw in the largest one that's going to sit right in front of us down here. So you can draw in the largest of your stones right here at the bottom of your scene, nice and dark, and then set the brush size to maybe 11%, draw in the next one. And of course, when they get a little bit closer towards you, you can see the surface of the stones a bit more. So you can detail them a little bit more in terms of giving them a bit more of an interesting shape to them. You also potentially want to start thinking about stacking them behind each other. So at the front here, they'll have a big gap to them. But as they start to make their way further back, you do want to start thinking about how do we potentially try and start stacking these so that they look like they are very close together in the distance, you know? And all of these are simply just these kind of rounded, quite sort of rogue ellipse style shapes almost in here. Now, when you start to collapse them down and start putting a few very close together, they do look really good. And if you end up having some that have got no gap in between, that's great. If you have some with a gap, that also looks great. It just shows variety, and they weren't evenly spaced when they were laid down. So you can, by the way, as long as you can always think about a story, a convincing story. No, they weren't laid correctly. Joel laid them. Then it's all that matters. You've got everything you need to make it convincing. Now, my ones at the very beginning now are starting to get really too big. So I'm going to just grab my eraser quickly and just erase them and redo them. So I can make them now really small. And to be honest, now they're just almost like one line as they make their way towards the actual land. And potentially I could do with adding in a 3% here, brush size, with one more just in front there. So at this point, you want to just take a look at the whole thing, maybe make changes. You can always do something like this where you grab the freeform option here of your selection tool and maybe just move things around, just like that. You maybe even want to distort them, so maybe make them a bit bigger here and flatten them in that corner. All these different types of things just to make minor adjustments which Procreate allows us to do. We can make all of these adjustments as we go, just little things like this. So once you've drawn something like that, all we now need to do is start sort of detailing the side profiles of them. So we have to actually go back through them now with probably a 6% brush size and draw down like this on the sides, and then with a really dark line, so make that opacity back up to 100%, dark line around the edge. There you go. So your top side now will be a little bit grayer than this side that we are doing now. So your top edge, nice and grey on the top surface, and then we're just drawing in the side profile of some of those rocks. Sometimes I can't get to some of the edges because they're of course stacked right next to each other, and that's fine. We can just make our way backwards through them. These ones here at the front, you may want to think about overly exaggerating the height of them, making them even higher, just so that these ones here have got more height to play with. And then as you get further back, you've got something to actually add. Now, because of course, when we get further back, all that detail is going to start getting collapsed. You may only be able to literally draw on top of the actual shape itself with a bit of a dark line on the side profile, and that's it. You won't be able to detail it too much. And I don't really want you to detail it heavily back there. Now, at this point, we also then want to start thinking of adding in some shadows underneath them. So we need to go to our layers. We need to tap on the layer below and create a new layer. We're going to keep the same brush. We're going to go ahead and set the brush to 18%. The opacity can be 100, that's fine. But you just have to very lightly, just towards the underside of the rock here, add in some color. Now we're gonna add that bleed effect to this. So I don't want you to add in too much color underneath the ones further back. Just a little bit of color underneath them. Just a little something like that. And you, to be fair, all the way back here, you can just draw in a little zigzag shape. You don't need to do anything too particular or too impressive. Just a little bit of a shadow running underneath, a little something like this. And then grab your smudge tool again and just smudge that down. Vertical fashion, smudging it down. And because we separated the shadow, it's now on its own layer, you can just smudge it down, giving it that same bleed effect and it not interfere. Potentially you may need to move like the color left and right a little bit like I was just doing, but ultimately you should just be able to give these ones at the back here just the tiniest little drag down, tiny amount, just a little bit back there, but it's mainly these ones at the front just so we get some more detail on them. Then we're going to go ahead and go to our layers above. I've got that line. I'll delete that line. I don't need it anymore. Now in front of my rocks, I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it to the rocks. Now I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to go ahead and grab the gray in the middle of the first column there. I'm going to set the brush size to 6%, and we're just going to add in some gray tones on top of the rock here, like around the edge, leaving little dark patches, but basically brightening up that top patch here of our stones. Just a little bit of color on top of them, only on the ones closest towards us. Here we could really detail this rock right down here in front of us, just a little bit more color on it. But the ones further back, we start to lose them a little bit, don't we? So just the lightest little gray patch if you think you want to brighten up the top surface of some of those rocks. And maybe you do, maybe you want to go all the way to the back and just add in like a little line just across the tops of them, just to give them a little bit more of that grey tone to them. Now it's really simple to start moving backwards now in our design and add some background content. So we're going to create a new layer. I'm going to drag it all the way down to the bottom underneath your reflections. If you want to, at the top here, by the way, these 3 layers here that we created for the rocks, we can swipe from left to right, group them together, and we'll just call it rocks. Now, I don't doubt that everybody's path is also going to look different with the amount of stones in here. So make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them so I can see what you came up with for your path here. So let's go ahead and move to the very back of our layers, right to the bottom. We're going to go to our colors and move across then to the top of the 3rd column. We're going to go to our brush and change it to the Eagle Hawk Wet. Maximum opacity size, we can set it to 18%. We want to draw in a mountain. So that's going to start all the way up here, and I want to sort of bring in like a really steep incline, and then it curves back up on itself, creates like another piece of land here, and then just kind of swoops down in behind the tree. Now that's probably a little bit too wide, so what I would do is probably grab my selection tool and just make a selection of that, tapping on the dot, and just move that one little bit and just move it across. I don't want it stretching across the halfway point of the design. Now, once you've got your shape in play, set your brush size to 33% and drag down in the same angle that you imagine the rock formation is coming down. So you can create all these streaks. Every time you draw a streak, it's a slightly different color, don't forget. And so we can drag this one across the face of this one and just draw in line after line the rocky kind of face as it makes its way all the way down towards the water's edge. Now we're going to bleed out the edges of this as well, so it's not going to be the be all and end all of this area. It's just adding in a bit of content towards the background. So once you've done something like this, grab your smudge tool, tap on your smudge tool, making sure it is the wet sponge again. We're going to make the size a lot bigger though, around about say 16%, and we're just going to push up and we're going to push down. So we're going to vary it up. You can make the brush size even larger if you want, like a 23%, pushing in from the edge here, pushing up in and across our sort of mountain range there in the distance. And then one thing we want to purposely do is we want to push up, and especially around our tree, I'm going to bring the brush size down to say 14%. I'm going to push in from the side here and create what is essentially like a low hanging cloud almost, but separating the dark tone in the background from my lovely little tree in the foreground here. I don't want it getting impeded in any way, so I can just run straight across there. I can even wiggle my pen through there if I need to, wiggling it through like so. Just breaking down those shapes. You can blend out the edge in here. Maybe it's some low hanging mist in the background, but we want to just bleed out our hills in the background because they're just background content. That's all they are. They're nothing to be sort of other than filler for the rest of our scene. So you can just really bleed them out, and make sure you push up right from down here, because the bleed of the actual water and the smudge here will fall quite low. So you don't want to end up with like a dark patch in behind, and that's important for later on as well. So I'm just pushing the color around to make sure I've got a gap between that and my main focal points. Now we are going to detail this to a degree. We're going to create one more new layer. We're going to go to our colors and grab this color here, the middle of the third column. My brush needs to change back to Eagle Hawk detail, and the brush needs to be set to 18%. We are going to make my way down here. I'm going to make my way down here, and I'm just going to kind of detail it in a sense where I'm going to try and create some rocky features. I've made the brush size ever so slightly smaller. I'm just going to try my best to run down here, create an interesting avenues, and maybe even like a horizontal or diagonal line across there like so. The kind of scraping of the rock and the shape of the rock, and we're not going to exclude this fella over here either, so we're going to run in some color there, maybe even slightly smaller, about 6% now, and just maybe create like a flat top on there and then wiggle that down the side. Create some zigzag and wiggles like this so that you don't have to think about creating streaks, just something simple. And then just like before, we'll go to our brush and we'll just smudge that out. You can make your brush size nice and small, but you can just smudge out the very bottom edge if you get really low with it, and just the very bottom edges of those details is enough. Now if you zoom all the way out, you should now have a little bit of a sort of mountain-esque kind of range back there. Then we're going to create another one further back, and they're just going to get even simpler the further we get further back. So we're going to go ahead and create a new layer, drag it underneath. We're going to go ahead and go to our colors, top of the fourth column now. Brush wants to be set to Eagle Hawk wet. Brush size 18%, and then what I want you to do is I want you to go to your layers and hold on the layer and hold the tick. That hides everything, because what I want you to do is I want you to just use the whole of the canvas here to create like a wiggly mountain range here, maybe some harsh areas here, maybe it droops again, and then maybe it makes its way back up into what is the peak, and then it comes down and goes down here as well. Then go to your brush, set it to 33%, and again draw in all those lines of how the land drags down. Don't overdo the darkness of it, but just utilize the brush now to draw in how the land flows. And again, in a minute, we're going to sort of smudge out the bottom area anyway, but all of these hues in here will just still remain enough that we can just nicely have some different tones back there. By all means, make the brush size about 60% if you want in this very, very large area here, and just bring that down. Maybe even bring in like a shadow across like this. Very, very simple. You do not need to overcomplicate it. And also, if we go to our layer now and we hold down on the tick, what we're going to do is we're going to grab our cursor. We're going to use the option of uniform, and we are just going to scale it right down in size and push it all the way back in our scene. I might even rotate it slightly, and we're going to compress it. So we're going to make it really, really small. So that's where you can utilize sometimes a really large shape, make it smaller, and then you've got so much more detail in there. Grab your brush, your smudge brush, set the size to maybe around about 12%, if not larger, 15. Really go to town. Now we're also going to lower the opacity of this as well. So we do not want to sort of get rid of it too much on the top edge. So again, give your tree some space to breathe, but these occasional very soft little peaks in the background will look amazing. You can just push them up, push them all the way up and in, and smudging up from the bottom allows you to kind of essentially erase, but just chuck it up right towards the edges of the shapes like so that you just give the top of the shape a little bit of a look. Then go to the layer, tap on it and bring its opacity down to around about 50%. That should really fade it out, push it into the background of our design. You may want to move it around. You can push it any way you like. You can even scale it down in size. It doesn't need to connect to there in any way. You can just kind of scale it right down, hit the tick when you're done. Now we just want to create one more range in the background again. So we're going to create another new layer, drag it underneath. So we're going to drag it all the way to the bottom. I'm going to hold down on the tick again, that little trick again, and then go to our colors, top of the 5th column. Your brush wants to be set to the wet again, but we're going to set it to 18% and we're going to try our best to create a really interesting, very kind of steep East Asian kind of landscape here. So these beautiful rocky shapes here. Let them drag down and then occasionally one just spikes right up and out of the landscape, and then you can just vary it up, create as much detail as you like. And again, just like before, grab a brush size, probably around about 33%, color that in very quickly. You can even probably do it in 1 or 2 coats because this one is going to go down to around about 25% opacity. So we are going to lose lots of this. So I wouldn't overthink this. Look how quick and easy I'm doing it, and I'm not giving it too much time and attention. With some of these kind of paintings like this, you can really keep them quite simple at the back of the scene, and therefore we don't need to add in too much sort of time or detail onto here. So we'll grab our cursor, we'll scale it down in size just for a little bit temporarily, then go to our layers, hold down on the tick, then go back to the cursor again and just move it into a position that you like the look of. Make it really, really small, push it right the way back here. I urge you to kind of tuck it in behind here on the left, really. Then tap on your cursor, grab your smudge tool. It should already be set to the same settings, so you're all good to go. You can just smudge your way through some of those areas, pushing up from the bottom to also leave a gap between the layer in front of it as well. So I'm pushing from left to right here now, just to kind of smudge inwards to try and leave this with a bit more space. Now here, arguably, I've got too much detail on top of each other, so I could scale that down in size again and move it across to the left-hand side, or even towards kind of the middle ground, or just completely redo it. So it's worth just noting that you don't want to kind of replicate areas in front of you too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my eraser, hold down on it, and I'm just going to change the brush. What's that set to? Eagle Hawk Detail. Let's set the brush size to around about 12%, and I'm just going to chop straight through here, but in a way hopefully I can try and break it up enough that it doesn't interfere then with that one in front of it, or it doesn't sort of replicate it too much. So just something like that. So sometimes it's trial and error. Sometimes you don't have a vision in mind or haven't considered those possibilities just yet until you put it into position where then it's really apparent. Smudge tool, a couple more smudges around there. And again, as I mentioned, we're going to go to our layer, bring the opacity down all the way down to 25% should do the trick. Now, if you want to, you could always go ahead and bring the one over here a little bit higher in its opacity. It's totally up to you, depending on how much you smudged. If you've smudged a lot, then potentially you might be able to bring it up a little bit like I have. Now, one of the really cool tricks with this is if we go to our layers now and we create a new layer and drag it underneath our mountain, so it's right at the bottom in front of our background color. If we go to our brush and we set our brush to the soft brush in the group, the colors now over here on the right hand side, we can start to add them into the scene and add like a bit more of an interesting, more vibrant wash to the background. So I can grab the orange, top right of the palette, brush size probably around about 12 to 15%. Very lightly just wiggle my pen through here. Now, because we've smudged out all of the areas underneath here, there's no color in them. So when we do this now, we can bring in these beautiful new color tones in here, then switch it to the yellow, the middle of the far right column, And again, wiggle that through there in interesting, more vibrant tones, especially here in the middle. You know, you kind of accent in the centerpiece of our design, but kind of giving our piece of paper here a bit more color to the background, different hues. Then you can also go ahead and grab this pinkish tone here, top of the second column from the right, maybe a little bit more of that towards like the mountain bases potentially. But ultimately, you can put it randomly wherever you like. Put in a little bit of pink in here, maybe a little bit by the tree. It's quite light, it's almost white-ish, so be a bit careful with that. And then there's also this orange tone here as well, but again, please be quite sort of aware that it's quite vibrant. So you may want to just put in a little bit of orange, say, in behind there, like it's an additional bit of that bleed and smudge potentially. So just some additional little color tones in there, randomly allocated into, honestly, random little spots throughout the design. And you can carry that on up towards the top, although we are going to add a layer in a minute that will get rid of that. But I do urge you just to make sure that you do add color towards the top as well. And orange and yellow primarily will look the best. Lovely. And then we're going to go ahead and go to our layers. We'll create one more new layer. We're then going to go to our colors and grab the bottom right of the palette, which matches our frame. If we set the brush size to around about, say, 25% with the soft airbrush, at the top here, I want to go left to right until the top of the scene is basically white and it fade down and into the rest of the scene. Now, we don't want to go over the top in terms of, we still want to have like a bit of a yellowy hue there. So I'm just going really light and then I'll go over it a few times, but just making sure I still preserve that line there. I just want to keep the color in this bottom area really, so that it's all the most vibrant tones. Then go to your actions and turn off your drawing grid and you can get an idea for your finished design. Now, if you're like me, there's potentially a few extra additions you can create here. I'm going to go right to the top of my layers and I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to set the blend mode to add, and this is optional. I'm going to set the opacity down to 50% and I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to go ahead and grab this tone here, bottom of the second column. And my brush wants to be set to Eagle Hawk Detail. I'm going to set the brush size to the 6%, sorry, to start with, and then I'm going to go ahead and just make my way through the design, accenting brighter spots. This is my artistic liberty. This is where I like to now get through here, as if this was like an inking tutorial. I've gone down to 3%. I would be actually going against the rules and the laws of almost what we should be learning here with these kind of waterish color style designs, because you wouldn't be able to draw this back in, but we can do with Procreate. We've got the ability to do so. So I'm going to see what I like. So I'm just accenting the edge of some of these stones just to give them a little bit more vibrancy. I'm then going to go ahead and do some more highlighting on top of some of these steps here, leaving a few out. Then as I'm making my way further back, making sure I remember I'm on top of everything, so I can't just go too rogue with it. Towards the back, I'll brighten them up. My arch here, I'm going to go ahead and brighten up the inside there. I'm going to brighten up the right side. I'm going to go ahead and do some color on the top edge in that gap. And again, I'm just taking artistic liberties. This is just what I like to do sometimes to really focus our attention into that center area. I'm going to go down the side profile of my tree here, really brightening that up, giving it some love and attention. I'm going to create little random flicks, all with the same brush, all on the same layer, just random flicks. I could even wiggle my pen along the edge there. So with a 2% brush size, I could just wiggle my pen along the edge, following the shape of it to accent all of that grass. And then I could even add in another squiggle or wiggle here as well, just to again show some areas getting some lighting. I can go over the top of my rocks here, adding in some lighting on them too, and showing, I'm imagining a right hand side light source. I'm going to take some real artistic liberties here with a 3% on top of these lovely little canopies that we created earlier on. I'm going to create the same levels of flicks, so just vibrancy and brightness here, just to help this sort of foreground area just pop a little bit more, just to make it stand out. And you don't have to do that. If you liked the look of it prior, then you'll be happy and you won't need to do this. But there are a few little things you could do. You could even go to the layer, tap on it and drawing assist it, and set that brush size to something really small, like a 2%, and create some horizontal streaks through the water here, showing how still it is. Also maybe just a few off the edge of the land and maybe some around the base of the land as well. a few very small thin streaks. Go really, really small with it. Create some really interesting small dashes. And then as you make your way closer towards the camera, you can add in some larger lines, larger in length, larger in size and thickness. But really try and keep the foreground area here quite sort of clean. Don't add in too much. Just a few little scrapes across the water there, just to add in that, again, little extra details for me. Just help make it pop, help make it stand out. Couple more in there. Let's see what a 6% looks like. Yeah, see, they're fairly big and chunky, aren't they? So we'll add in a few maybe around the base of here. Lovely. And I think that will be everything. And then if you are someone like me who sometimes tends to lean on the side of being a little bit lighter with your pressure, what I urge you to do is just swipe down with 3 fingers and go to copy all. You should now still be at the top of your layers anyway. You can tap away and swipe down with 3 fingers and go to paste. That will paste in a whole new version of your design. And then this is, again, for someone who maybe didn't add enough color in the background or was a little bit lighter with their pressure. There's a couple of things we can do. We can go to hue, saturation, and brightness. We can first of all crank that up. It's totally up to you how vibrant you want to make it, but sometimes it gets a bit garish. So I probably, in my opinion, wouldn't go any higher than 60%. But again, that's completely relevant based on how hard you pressed. But if you want to chuck a bit more color in there, go up to about 53 or 52%, and then tap away. Then go back to your adjustments again. Go to curves this time. And then this is your brightness, and this is your shadows. You can bring that across, and notice how it gets really bright, of course. And let me show you the opposite. If I bring that across that bottom line, I'll bring in some more shadow. So what I can do is if I pressed ever so slightly too light, I can bring that in, get that really nice dark tone to it, but then I can counter that and add in some more white, which should balance it out. You can always tap above, and then you get this menu here. You can hold down to see the difference. Now, sometimes people will like it, sometimes you won't, and it's totally dependent on what you want to do. Maybe somewhere in the middle for me. So just the minor amount of adjustment, because I managed to actually do it okay this time in terms of the dark tone. So it does vary. You can also go ahead and add a dot here and adjust your mid-tones potentially as well, if that's something you need to adjust. But that's just the curves. And if I pinch with 2 fingers, go full screen with 4, we end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. As always, make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them. Instagram and Facebook are a really good spot for you to tag me in your finished creations for me to see them. Make sure to subscribe to the channel though. It helps me out a bunch, and I'm trying to make my way slowly towards 100k. So if you can help me on my way, that'd be amazing. And if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and join me over on Patreon. I've been posting 3 exclusive tutorials to my patrons now for years, and the catalogue of exclusive tutorials sits at well over 120 at the time of recording. And did you know you can actually go to my website and see every single tutorial design over there on my website first before you join my Patreon? And that way you can make sure that my Patreon tutorials are fit for you and they're something that you'll find interesting. So you can check that out before you join. The link to it is in the description down below. And if you like this video here on YouTube, you'll love this one on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.